All right, guys, welcome back to another video on the channel. Today, we're going to be giving out 5 sleeper picks and 5 busts in the upcoming NFL draft. We're going to be doing 5 each. So we're just going to go back and forth. We'll both do one, and then we'll go back and forth with that until we get through all 5 of each of them. And I guess sleeper and bust might be a little harsh. We're just going to talk about guys that we kind of believe in and not believe in. So we'll start off with some of the sleepers if you want to go with your first one.
Yeah, and the first one I had him on board, it probably comes to no surprise to you guys that have been watching me for a while. I have Darnell Wright. If you guys don't know, I'm a pretty big Tennessee fan, and he was a very impressive blocker in the SEC last year, and he particularly impressed me in the game against Alabama, where his assignment was Will Anderson Jr. Will Anderson was Will Anderson, but for the most part, it was a good showing. He's really good balance for being a bigger guy on the outside. But the one thing I want to point out about him is his contact. It's something that's not talked about a lot with offensive linemen, but being able to make contact first is such a huge thing when you got to deal with these, electric NFL pass rushers. And he makes a point to get his hands on first. And he really shuts down some, good edge guys that I've seen him play. So I think he's going to have a very productive NFL career.
And I'm going with another guy. I got some deeper guys that I'll go into later in this. But I'll start off with a guy that you guys see me talk about pretty much every week, Calijah Kancey. Absolutely like electric, athletic, just dog overall. He had a 98 athleticism score, and that was the best in the position. He ran the fastest 40 time by a D tackle ever. And he has pretty much the same exact build as a guy like Aaron Donald, who is, a first ballot Hall of Famer. I'm not saying he'll be as good as him, but if you're looking at it, he's going to have an amazing career. And I would say he's a little bit of a sleeper just because his name isn't really brought up with the top guys, but I think he should be. And I think he should be a top 15 pick if I was drafting.
Yeah, fair enough. My next sleeper I really like is BJ Ojulari. Out of LSU, he's a really good pass rusher. I think he's getting slept on a little bit because he has a smaller build, but I think off the edge, he might be the fastest guy in this draft, genuinely. And that includes guys like Anderson and Tyree Wilson. If you ask me, honestly, I was looking at pro comps, but I have more of a comp from this draft class. I think he plays a lot like Nolan Smith, but he gets a lot less buzz. I know they profile slightly differently, so I understand why the comparison might not be perfect, but they're both guys that win with speed, moves off the edge, and both SEC guys who were productive. And I think honestly, he should be a first round guy. I don't think he will be. I think whatever team gets him in the early second is gonna have a really solid edge rusher for their future.
And next up, I got Kenny McIntosh. He's a great wide receiver on the outside, great runner, and he's also a great pass catcher. And throughout most of his career in college, he was running behind guys like DeAndre Swift, Zamir White, and James Cook. So he didn't really get to see those first overall running back snaps, but he's a great talent, and I think he'll end up being a good second back for a lot of teams and a great third down guy.
Yeah, hey, I almost had him on my list. I decided to go with another running back I've been gassing up throughout this process, and that's Dwayne McBride out of UAB. We talked about this personally when we did our running back rankings, but I think he's criminally underrated. He's one of my favorite athletes in this draft. He's 5'11", decent weight for the position, and he's a downhill runner. Once he hits his hole, he's dangerous. He's a lot smaller than Derrick Henry, but in the sense where Derrick Henry gets his steam almost after he hits the line, that's how I see him. The way I describe him, he's kind of like a taller Maurice Jones-Drew. Once he's in the creases of the offensive line, he's dangerous. Like any other back in this draft, he can bust it outside a little bit. But I think his downhill running in between the gaps is what makes me such a fan of his. I think he's going to be a starter level talent one day.
Next, I got my dog, Marvin Mims, wide receiver out of Oklahoma. He ran a 4.38. And I guess there's a little bit of concerns about his athleticism overall, but I think he's a great guy. He has, I would say he's a smaller wide receiver, but for his size, he's pound for pound great, blocking very well for, especially as a wide receiver at his size. And I would say in other classes with a lot bigger receivers, I'd be more concerned. But in a draft where a lot of the receivers are smaller, I'm not that concerned. He's great yards after catch. And I think the one issue that scouts see with him is that he needs to develop his route tree more. But if that's the one thing I'm looking at as a wide receiver, I'm not that worried about. I think he can definitely develop that in the NFL.
Yeah, and talking about a guy with some room to develop that I'm a fan of. This seems very obvious. I know he's not a sleeper. Everyone knows about him. But I'm going to talk about Anthony Richardson. He is my QB1 in the draft class. I don't think he'll go first overall, but he is my favorite prospect. He just profiles as an NFL star QB. He's physically gifted, and he has raw arm talent, just like stud rookies we've seen before, such as Josh Allen, such as even a guy like Mahomes. I'm not saying he's going to play just like them, but they came in with a similar vibe to me. I don't think he's as much of a project as people like to make him out to be. I mean, of course, it'll take time. He was a 1 year starter at Florida, but he was so comfortable in the action he got. I'm kind of bought in on him already. And he's an underrated passer in terms of accuracy. And I think he is caught up on film making some poor passes, but he had to make much tougher passes than a guy even like Will Levis, who has a lot of buzz about being a safer option. But when I actually look at film, I think they make the easy throws well, and Richardson actually makes those tougher throws more often. So everyone knows him, but I just want to throw it out there. I genuinely would pick him as my favorite QB prospect this year.
So now I'll go with two guys who are probably very under the radar for a lot of people. If you look at most big boards, both of these guys aren't in most people's top 10s at their positions. First, I'm going with Jaleel Billingsley from Texas. He's a tight end. He's just had a great pro day. He came in at 6'4", 220. He ran a 4.57, and he had a 36 vert. And overall, he's just an amazing athletic tight end. And I guess the reason why he's kind of fallen towards the bottom of list is because he's a little more raw, and he's kind of like a guy like Darnell Washington, where he obviously has the athleticism, but it just depends on how he uses it, and he has a lot of room to develop. But I think he's going to be a beast depending on where he goes, and he's probably going to be a day 3 guy, but I think a team is going to get a real steal with him.
Yeah, and I'm a fan of his personally. I think that's a great pick. One last guy I want to shout out. It depends who you talk to, if he has buzz or not. I like Tyreek Stevenson, the corner out of Miami. In this draft class, we don't have a ton of physical outside corners. We see a lot of hybrid guys, but Tyreek Stevenson plays the outside very well. He's very long. He's a tall guy. I think he uses his size correctly. He makes these reaching athletic plays because he plays as big as he is. He's not necessarily a guy that gets a ton of interceptions. He didn't in college, at least, but he broke up passes. And the ACC had some of the best wide receiver prospects this year. We see Zay Flowers, Josh Downs, and Stevenson matched up really well against them on a Miami defense that in general was poor. So I feel like he stood out to me. And, if you're going to be a really good corner on a bad defense, then you're kind of doing it on your own to an extent. So he impressed me a lot.
I also have a cornerback for my final sleeper of this draft. I got Darius Rush, and he has great length and size. And he was great in zone this year. He ran a 4.38, which was the 6th best for corners, and he was faster than Christian Gonzalez. He's not as agile. He had not as great of a vert and just long jump wise, but I would say for a guy like him, if he could improve on his man coverage, then he'll definitely be a great receiver or cornerback in this upcoming draft. And even if he doesn't develop that much, if he's going to end up being a zone cornerback, there's a lot of room for that in the NFL, and he has the athleticism. So I think as long as he can develop, he'll be fine.
Yeah. And I think that means we get to move on to the bust. I just want to throw this out here. We're predicting a bust is it can be tough sometimes because depending on the scheme fit, I think you can agree any of these guys could have a really successful career. But I think in general, these are just guys that we're not buying as much as the general draft public. So I'm going to start first. I have a running back. I have Jahmyr Gibbs out of Alabama. And running back out of any position probably has the most to do with team fit. So this may age poorly, but to me, he's smaller than I'd like. He's only 5'9", and that's okay, but he's skinny to me. He also, compared to his fast 40-yard dash times, which I was impressed with, he doesn't look that fast on the field to me. And I think a good comparison for him would be LaShawn McCoy, which sounds really good because he was such a good back. But the one downfall of LaShawn McCoy is that he loved his cut back more than anything else. He played around a little too much in the backfield sometimes, and that ended up losing his team yards, especially as he got older. So I see Jahmyr Gibbs do that a lot. If that can be fixed in the NFL, I think he'll be okay. But it worries me for someone that people even want to argue is the best running back in this class.
I mean, that's a little a little hot take to come out. That's definitely
I know.
a guy that could. So I guess with my first overall bust, I'll one up you. I'm going with Will Levis. I don't care. I just don't see that. His turnover problems, looking at his touchdown to interception ratio, it's not great. And 1/4 of his passes were behind the line of scrimmage, which, if you're looking at that, it just shows that he doesn't have the great deep ball. I know he has an arm, but that doesn't mean he's good. And I see a lot of people talking about comparing him to Josh Allen. And obviously, if you look at Allen coming out of college, that makes sense because Josh Allen had a big arm and wasn't as just could be able to hit the receiver. But Will Levis doesn't have that big of an arm compared to Josh Allen. And overall, I mean, he's going to get drafted in the top 10. He's going to go somewhere and probably end up being a decent quarterback. But there's too many problems for me, especially in a draft class where there's a guy like Anthony Richardson, who you talked about earlier. And if I'm looking at both of these guys who are both labeled projects, and I understand that completely, especially compared to the other two guys at the top, I'm taking the guy in Anthony Richardson and taking, I guess if that's a bigger risk, I believe way more in Anthony Richardson than Will Levis.
Yeah, and you know I appreciate that take. I have one more kind of hot take guy here, which people aren't gonna like. I have Deontay Banks. Deontay Banks out of Maryland. He is a good corner. I don't think he's horrible, but for somebody that keeps rising up draft boards and people think might go in front of Joey Porter Jr. or someone of that caliber, I completely disagree. I see him get lost in man coverage sometimes, and I think a lot of scouts have a knock on his makeup speed. In the film I watched, I didn't think it was that bad. I think it's more the way he opens up his hips sometimes. You like to get that strong base or whatever so you can cut out. He moves a little awkwardly sometimes in the coverage, which scares me a little bit. But mostly when his back is to the football, he just gets nervous. He kind of loses it. I don't know. For a guy that's projected to go so high, I'm not in love with him.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess we're going bar for bar at position at this point. I got a cornerback too. Keely Ringo, I'm not that impressed with him overall. Watching him, I mean, I watched every single game that he played in college. He only got to play 2 years, so I understand that he definitely has some room to develop, and he's great athletic wise. But the issues with me, I mean, are probably the same with everyone. He has a lot of penalty issues, and his body control when the ball's in the air or just when he gets beat, he just doesn't really make that effort to get back to the ball. And it seems like he's just beating up the receiver essentially. And I guess with the issues with him tracking the ball and penalty issues, that can definitely get fixed. And with a guy that's as athletic as him, I definitely see him having a good career. So I think he can fix these issues, but I guess he's more of a bust in my sense, where I see a lot more corners that are better than him. I know some people are mocking him around that end of the first round, second round. I have as my 8th cornerback, so I still think he's good, but I just see better guys than him.
Yeah, and I'm going to pivot to a guy that I know you like, so I'm sure we won't agree on this one. But D tackle out of Michigan, I have Mozzie Smith. I have some issues with him. I don't think he's horrible again, but there's a lot of D tackles I like more. Smith, he has short arm length for his position, which doesn't really matter in college, but in the NFL, a small wingspan can be a difference maker for a lot of guys. Uh, he doesn't have a ton of disruption from the jump. I feel like I'll give him a lot of credit as the play goes on compared to most D tackles. He's very consistent and stays with it. He makes a lot of good plays late in the snap, but he's not super disruptive when the ball goes. And he doesn't serve any pass rush purpose for me. He's more of a 2 down guy. He's very run heavy. And in those sets where the team is going to run, if you're playing the Titans, if you're playing let's say the Giants when they had Saquon. I know that's a little touchy now, but those are teams that you can play Mozzie Smith against. Against a lot of teams like Kansas City, like Buffalo, I don't even know if he's able to serve a purpose. So I have mixed feelings about him. I think he will find a role for himself, but he's not he's not as dimensional as some of these other guys we look at.
I'll give you another D tackle. I have Keanu Benton, and a lot of people have him in their top 5 at D tackle. But my issue with him is once he gets inside the pocket, he just can't really get the sack done. He gets a lot slower once he gets through there. And it's clear to see that he uses most of his energy getting through. And I mean, his reaction time overall, I guess that kind of fits into that. Just isn't that great for me. And I have him as in the 8th spot on my D line overall. And kind of just the same thing as Keely Ringo. I don't really believe in him as much as some other guys in this draft. I still think he'll be a great player. He's very athletic. I'm pretty sure he was in the top 5 in his athleticism wise at his position. But once he can, I guess, just getting into the pocket overall, and an issue that we've seen with him too is that once he loses his pad level control, he can get pushed back pretty easily. But that's just really my concerns with him. But he is athletic, so I think he could figure it out.
Yeah, fair enough. And I think both of us have been pretty nice about the prospects we're talking about because, things could really go either way. This is the one guy I'm not going to be nice about. Henry To'oTo'o. Uh, I don't think he's a good football player. I don't think he's good in the run game. And he has moments where he wasn't even a playmaker on the Alabama defense. I'm shocked he's getting second round buzz because he came into Tennessee as a heavily recruited guy, was all right at Tennessee, transferred to Alabama, and he was the starting middle linebacker at Alabama. So, of course, he's going to get buzzed, but he didn't really do anything. He's not a hard worker. I don't know the guy personally, but from all accounts from scouts and, teams that I've read, they consider him kind of lazy. They don't know if he's going to actually push himself in the next level. And my biggest concern for him, outside of that characteristic stuff, which I don't know, he could be a great guy. He loses one-on-one matchups to running backs when they're in pass block way too often. For an undersized middle linebacker, you expect him to, have some strength to be able to beat running backs. But no, I mean, we see running backs in pass block that handle him. And, if you can't even beat a running back getting to the quarterback, you don't serve much in the pass rush. And, I mentioned earlier, I don't think he does much in the run game. Like, what do you do? He's a hybrid guy. He's athletic, but you got to be good at something to be, a linebacker I like going into the NFL draft. And he's one of the only ones in like the top 10 list that, a lot of guys put out that I don't see anything I like about him. So that sounds harsh, but if he could develop into something better, but as of right now, he is not a good linebacking prospect at all.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going with that, I'll give you a guy who I don't think is very good at football, Kayshon Boutte from LSU. What I see out of him, I guess the main concern already, 2 surgeries on his right ankle. As a wide receiver, that's absolutely dangerous. I mean, it's a ticking time bomb at that point. And he has problems with drops and he's not athletic. So what does he do? He's not in my top 10 overall for wide receivers. And I know that might be a little controversial. I know some people have him in their top 10, mostly towards the bottom. But from a guy who I honestly, I mean, looking at his film before the combine and coming into this draft last season, I thought he was going to be a top 10 guy. And I didn't see where he could fall off. But this past season, just not great. And then overall in the combine, not performing well, especially against guys who, like we always say in this draft, there's a lot of fast guys, there's a lot of athletic guys. And for a guy to score, to be the 45th overall athletic wise wide receiver is like that's not great. And if he has problems with drops, I don't see him being a good player in any facet. And I'm sure a team will draft him. Obviously, he'll probably go, especially with teams needing receiver round, but I would not take him if I was a GM.
Yeah, and I mean, we see wide receivers with injury concerns not get drafted. Losing the guy's name, so this might be a bad point to bring up, but an LSU guy either last year or the year before, losing his name right now, but he had injury concerns and he didn't get drafted either. So I could see that. Last guy I want to bring up, and this is very controversial, and I don't think he's bad. I actually think he'll be a day one starter. So, call him a bust if you want, but I have John Michael Schmitz out of Minnesota. I think it became really trendy to have him as the top center without actually watching him play at all or do anything. And I think that's just because he probably is the best pure center, like the guy that only played center in college. But there's so many guards. I see Steve Avila. I see Joe Tippmann, guys that played guard that would just profile as better centers than him. Just because he's not particularly explosive for a center, which is huge in the NFL. If you snap the ball and you can't explode out, you're going to get ran over by big D tackles. We see guys like Jordan Davis who would eat this guy alive. And then lastly, I mean, he's a 24-year-old rookie. We see guys like Hendon Hooker and Will Levis, and we're like, ooh, these guys are going to be 24, 23 when they get drafted. That's scary. But we're not talking about it with John Michael Schmitz. I know the centers usually have a bit longer of a lifetime, but I mean, when you're getting that much wear and tear and you're already coming in the same age as like, Michael Onwenu on the Patriots, for example, a guy that's been a good offensive lineman for years now, it's scary to me. So if I were a team looking to draft a center, I would go for a guy like Tippmann or, Avia, another guard instead of John Michael Schmitz. I don't necessarily see him as the top center prospect like other people might.
And I'll end it off with my fifth bust also being an offensive lineman. I got Jalen Duncan here out of Maryland. And I guess his number one overall thing that people talk about is that he's great moving around and he's great pulling as a tackle. But when I look at him, I don't really see that much out of him as a prospect. I mean, obviously he's athletic, he's got the size, but he is just absolutely terrible when an edge rusher comes on the outside, especially a fast one. Looking at his stats, he had 477 pass block snaps. He let up 28 pressures, 7 sacks, and 10 penalties. That is terrible. That is like bad overall. And you can just see, especially once he gets to the NFL level, once we have fast edges going at him, he's not going to be able to get through it. And he's had issues, especially in game, once he gets constant pressure of just basically giving up and just trying to use his size and not any technique. And I mean, he has the size overall, and especially in college, that's fine. But once you get to the NFL and you're going against the best of the best, he's not going to be able to hold up anything. And he reminds me a lot of Eric Flowers. That's my comparison to him.
That's not the comparison you want to get going into the NFL draft.
So overall, we gave some guys that we kind of believe in and some guys that we don't really believe in. A lot of these guys, this might get clipped in a few years, and some guy in this video, I guarantee, will probably be the best in his position at some point, just because that's how it goes.
Of course.
And a lot of these guys, I mean, it just depends really with the draft, team fits. There's so many factors that go into it. But I guess we're just looking at pretty much on paper, the combine and just their overall, everything that we saw from them in college. So some of these guys, I'm sure, especially some of the bust, will end up being great. I said Will Levis. Who knows what will happen with him, but confident with that one. But we'll see what happens with that.
We'll just have to wait and see.
That's true. And we'll probably go over this depending on what happens in the next few years. We'll come back to this video, but we could give out some more if you guys show some love on this video. We can talk about some guys, especially after the draft too. I feel like that'd be interesting because then we'll kind of have more of an idea of where they'll fit.
Yeah, and just one thing I want to say, I mean, if you guys do like this video, you want to show love, and you want us to come on here and make a video about a specific prospect, I think that's something we'd both be interested in. So, throw it in the comment section, if you want to see an Anthony Richardson video, a Bryce Young video, whoever your favorite prospect is, and we could come on here and talk about how we feel about him.
Yeah, and especially after the draft too, going into this summer, I feel like it'll be a lot easier for us to kind of look at them, especially with the team wise and what they'll get, especially with the quarterbacks that we're talking about.
For sure.
So if you guys enjoyed the video, just make sure to like it and give us a comment on who you want to see next. And we'll see you guys in the next video.
See you guys.